Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
We are on our final reflection, at least at this time, on hospitality. And just a quick review. Tremper began our conversation to talk about two very important elements, and that is in the ancient Near East, the code of hospitality was a form of honor in which you offered both protection and provision. And that is such a quick but core definition. Provision for what? Well, good food, but more than good food, good drink. An atmosphere that creates safety for you to engage whatever forms of reality need to be engaged. And that if that is grief, then we enter grief together. And we weep with those who weep, and we rejoice with those who rejoice. That's hospitality. You attune yourself. You involve yourself with your guests in a way in which you invite them more into the reality that they bring and the reality that is ahead. So that took us into our conversation of, hospitality changes over years. And it's as important to know that we need to learn from being given hospitality as it is that we offer. And you brought up, Becky, our dear friend, Annie Link, and how really our first daughter's name, Anna, is primarily because we both learned so much about life through Annie Link and how she offered us a hospitality that I would say is bar none, one of the sweetest and best we've ever known. So just to recount, anything else you want me to remind folks from what we covered before?
I think we've just always, since Annie, and then, just the stories. You're a World War II buff and know so many of the battles, and just, you love that. But recently, when we were in Albania visiting our son and his wife and granddaughter who lived there for a while, we learned that during World War II, they would harbor Jews. They wouldn't just harbor them in their home. They actually gave them an Albanian name, and they were Muslims, and they invited them in to be a part of their family. So to think of like all the people around the world for over time memorial that have done so much more than we're like talking about inviting someone to have a bed to sleep in or food. Like, whoa, we are at the very beginning of what it means to be hospitable.
Yes.
In comparison.
Yeah, and Tremper brought up in so many ways the stance we often hold toward immigrants, the mood, particularly to the south of the border, the comments that were made by Trump and others. These are rapists, these are criminals, these are drug dealers. And even if there were a 1% truth to any of that, it is a stance of judgment versus, again, yes, there needs to be assessment. Tremper even put words to, he would not hold to the notion of an open border, nor would I open my home without some level of engagement and assessment. But in that process, it is that sense of, do you hold it to be an honor and privilege to be able to be part of drawing a stranger into your world and into the benefits of being part of your world? And one of the things I wanted to underscore is I want you to think of every human being you know as to some degree a stranger. including somebody you've been married to. Well, we were trying to decide whether it's 44 or 45. We don't do math very well, but let's just say we're in our 5th decade of marriage. And in that, there's more for me to know about you, my beloved. So I'm meant to create a kind of home wherever we are, where you feel honored, where you feel invited, and that I give you as much of the best protection and provision I can allot and find, and equally so on your part. So that's what we want you to hold as we go into this discussion. And a bit of the shift is we want to talk about ideas and experiences, and finally, the category of suffering as something we are to be hospitable to. So often, at least often in the Christian community, I will hear this phrase, and it drives me batty, just freaking batty. And that is, I don't think that's biblical. Well, there's a lot in life that's not biblical, but the presumption you know what's biblical, and you can discern it, and you can, in one sense, cast away something that is not biblical and dismiss it out of hand. First of all, it does not honor creation. It does not honor the reality that God can speak in and through. If he can speak through Balaam's ass, I've always felt comforted about that, because it means maybe he could speak through me. But nonetheless, when you open a book and it is clearly not written by a quote unquote Christian, is your stance one of hospitality, or is it one of a stance of suspicion and critique? If so, I at least want to open up the possibility that you might learn to read poetry, prose, fiction, nonfiction, in a way that bears this stance of curiosity and openness and intrigue, but that idea of inviting.
Yeah, I think curiosity is so important and must be part of our living every day. I think, when you said creation, we're just still learning so much about elephants and whales and even birds. It's elevating my faith in God, learning that birds have evolved from dinosaurs. And actually, they're so evolved, they don't even have a bladder. They just don't even need that anymore. I'm just like, really, God, you did this? And whales, it's the grandmothers who teach the granddaughters. It's like, you're kidding. And it's all over the planet. And then elephants, we watched this thing on Disney Plus about elephants where they're walking and it's cracked, dry. But elephants, their bottom of the feet can feel the underground water. So, I mean, if I would have missed any of this knowledge I've gotten through books and watching things on their television, I'm just growing in faith. And I think that's what curiosity does. And especially when you have a heart that is settled in knowing that God is he's orchestrating so much.
Well, and you may remember the actual names of the books, but we listened to this unbelievable book about the secret language of trees. And then as you were reading a book on
salt,
well, but eventually on birds.
Oh,
and
yeah.
even
the
phrase
genius of birds. Yeah.
And the phrase that we often use, he or she, or I feel like I'm a bird brain, meaning small and fundamentally stupid. And it's like, no.
I'm thinking humans have not quite gotten the brilliance that I thought they had.
And the fact that God's woven that into all of creation, including the reality that he has created even within those who do not follow and in some sense bow the knee to Jesus. have so much to teach us, and sometimes to teach us things we don't want to hear, things that we have learned to either deny, ignore, or to not even know. And so, a good example of that is critical race theory. And we were in such a period of time where, even the initials, CRT, people who I wouldn't even think would have known of that, know those initials, but have a response of, well, that's Marxism. That's socialism. That's just an angry critique of blah, blah, blah. And again, our task is not in the moment to take you into critical race theory, but to actually say there's something to be learned, something to be welcomed, and therefore to be hospitable to begin to engage more truthfully the nature not only of our own individuality, but the nature of the systems that we live in the middle of. So the dilemma here is you don't have to agree with the person coming into your home to be hospitable, nor do you have to agree with the book you're reading in order to be hospitable to the ideas that are being offered to you. But it really requires, to some degree, a confession on your part as you look at CRT or a theory that you might not find yourself initially in accord with, to be able to say, what am I to learn? What do I not know? What can I engage? And this is something you've taught me a lot about in terms of what yoga has taught you, that you have what you have called a beginner's mindset.
Yeah, well, I definitely had a beginner's mindset when I married you. I really did. It was a new denomination for me. And I studied it. I had a beginner's mind, and I just bought into so many different ways of living and thinking. And I think now, we've both evolved from that in many ways as a older woman, with realizing that a woman's voice is important. So this would have probably not happened when we were in our 20s, to have made the leap to where we are now. I mean, you've helped found a seminary, a graduate program that allows women to be ordained. The times there are just so wonderful in so many ways that our capacity of understanding God is still firm, but it's widening a bit. And I think that's what you're saying about ideas.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was trained in a school that believed in what's called cessationism, the notion that the gifts of the Spirit were for a limited time until the establishment, so-called, of the foundation of the church, that is the scriptures. And so after the apostolic era, there was no need for some of the manifestations of the Spirit as you see in the book of Acts. And, being essentially almost barely a believer when I went to seminary, this, I don't know, it struck me as, well, all right, you know more than me. I guess this is true. Always struck me as a little weird, but nonetheless, it helped explain why, in my world, people were not speaking in tongues, people were not being healed, the dead were not being raised, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you we won't go into the particulars, but you took me into what we'll just call a particular Pentecostal world, where I remember going, oh, this is crazy. I
know you went, though. It took me a year or so to get you there, but they prophesied over you, 6 different people, and I sat just tears, they didn't even know our names. And then for myself, so that changed our lives.
Yeah, it did. It really did. I mean, there were things spoken to both of us. And again, to spend time in the particulars would be intriguing, but a diversion. There were things being spoken about my heart, my character, where I was in war, but also a lot of specificity about what was about to happen in our own ministry and lives, that without that provision, we would have been, it's like traveling to a very difficult country without having the proper, shall we say, clothing and provisions to be able to make your way through. To be hospitable to theological views or a view of Scripture that I differ with has not been an easy task. If you know the Enneagram, I certainly fall into the category of an 8. And those type of people are not particularly open to new ideas that are not their own.
But good thing I'm a 9, because I like mold and I just blend with whoever and whatever. So, but then I wanted to say, you got a speaking engagement in Montana.
Oh, yeah.
And we met with the denomination we weren't familiar with, and they gave us a picture of the two of us in our marriage that to this day is helping us to hang on to Jesus. And you know, it's like profound. So to have closed our hearts to the people that were so different than us, think of what we would have missed.
Well, and again, from critical race theory to Pentecostalism, or to approaches of hearing the voice of Jesus, all we're asking you to be aware of is it requires a kind of confession that I have so much to learn and that I'm essentially always a beginner, no matter how much I already know. So may that at least open up a category. You clearly, from your face that the audience can't see, you have a direction you want to go.
Oh, I just think this is so spot on, and we're not. But in Romans 12, starting in verse 9, it's from the Message. I just think this hits what we're saying. Love from the center of who you are. Don't fake it. Run for dear life from evil. Hold on for dear life to good. Be good friends who love deeply. Practice playing second fiddle. I think we've done that as a couple, and in both allowing the other to be first fiddle. And I think that's been so important. Don't burn out. Like, certainly we burnt out with some of our craziness. Keep yourselves fueled and aflame. Be alert servants of the master, cheerfully expectant. Don't quit in hard times. Help needy Christians. Be inventive in hospitality. That's just, there's a few more verses after that if you would like to read it. But I just think it keeps us within the gutters, the rails. What are those in the bowling alley things?
Oh, you're asking me. This is part of what age? I don't know.
It's the gutters.
The gutters. That's what it's called, a gutter.
I think so. It's keeping us within, where we need to stay.
Well, and part of that as well includes the ability to be able to say, even if the theory, idea, the book challenges me and I differ with it, can I at least listen to the things that are being stirred in my own heart as to what feels threatened? Because I'm likely, maybe I'm defending the truth, but maybe I'm also defensive against a new truth. And in that, is it possible you could hold both? Yeah, I differ with this thought or understanding of Scripture or this understanding of life, but can I welcome it, give it place, and begin to ask the kind of questions of the thought or theory or book that allow me to, again, not defend against and not primarily critique, but at least have a kind of intellectual hospitality to, in one sense, be transformed by what you're engaging. And when I say transformed, it may be that you actually come to believe what you believed before with even greater vigor and greater intensity. That would be a gift. Yeah. There are certain things that I've read over a lifetime where I feel like in the opposition to what was said, I'm actually clearer and dearer with what I do believe.
Yes.
So we're not implying that you need to have a general mood of agreeing with whatever gets offered, but at least a mood as a beginner to grow, to confess, to let your heart profit. But that's true of experiences as well. And like what comes to my mind, I don't know what comes to yours, but, for years, I've taken you into a lot of experiences that, at least initially, you may have not been real fond of me.
True.
Like motorcycling in New Zealand at the edge of spring, at the end of winter, in the midst of carrying all our gear plus fly fishing. That was one of those where I look back and go, we were much younger. But nonetheless, this was not an experience that you initially were very hospitable to.
No, the hairstylist, who was a Maori, was like, no, you're not taking this person over the mountains in the South Island on a motorcycle. This doesn't happen in our nation. But we went. You crossed your fingers and you looked at her, and she was a lot taller and larger than you, and you said, I won't do that. But you did.
All right. Again, I've not used that very often in life, crossing your fingers and basically going, I know I'm lying, but I want to get out of here, and we're gonna do this. But that experience, do you not look back on it and go,
I'm grateful. I'm so grateful we did those crazy things.
Well, and at least when I remember, what I hold is that moment near Gore, which they call the brown trout capital of the universe, not just the world, of the universe.
It's a crazy town. Boy, every billboard, it's just hilarious.
But do you remember the day you sent me off? You said, I can't go out. It's too windy and cold. And I found this one spot a mile or two from where we were staying, and it fished well. And I just thought, oh, you've got to come. You got to come. So I came back, got you on the motorcycle. You were like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
So windy. Oh my goodness. Yeah. It was so windy, and it's hard to use a fly rod when it's that windy. And plus they're smart fish. If you have that banner over your town, people all over the world, I don't know if the universe, are going to come and fish those waters. I had to get down and hide behind a bush. Oh, it was just crazy. But I was irritable, but dang it, I'm going to do this.
And what happened?
Well, you remember it better than me.
No, you tell it.
Well, I caught a brown trout.
Oh, good Lord. You caught a brown trout. And look, the fish, generally speaking, in New Zealand are robust, beautiful, large
they're
trout.
Smart. So they are large because
they're smart. But anyway, she caught the largest brown trout, the largest trout that our family has ever, shall we say, plucked out of a body of water. It was hilarious, a 31-inch brown trout. And I remember at one point, you're fighting the fish and you're exhausted. It was forever.
I'm sure I said, help me. And I'm sure you said no.
No. Well, again, stories like, will you be hospitable to my interpretation? I remember you looking at me and saying, you gotta hold the rod, but don't bring the fish in, and a look of ferocity,
okay.
And it was, don't lose it. So I held it for a couple minutes while you took a little rest, and you brought this trout in, and again, probably it means more to me than to you.
Mm-hmm. I forget about that.
But the fact is, there was no question that it was one of those places where I really felt the playfulness of Jesus saying, you've been fly fishing for decades. You love fly fishing. Your wife endures it. She'll occasionally go. She often catches amazing fish, but I'm going to give her the largest, most beautiful trout that you will likely ever see in this lifetime. And it still, for me, is one of those experiences where without it, I don't know if I would laugh as I do even in the midst of certain sufferings where I'm questioning the goodness of God and I'm doubting something of his provision. But those moments, and there are a lot of moments in our marriage where you've taken me into places I didn't want to go. When you differ in terms of desire, doesn't mean you comply as a general rule of thumb, but we're really asking, would you be hospitable to experiences that do not immediately fit your own category of what you might prefer?
Yeah. And we're learning to still do that more and more. And I love your heart, how you bless not only me, but our family and friends and even strangers, how you bless their glory, how you bless what they have done. And you're really good at that. And I want to be better at that too, to not feel envious that you caught the fish that I wanted, or, I love that about you.
Thank you. Well, I will at least confess, I still feel maybe a small portion of envy. Like I was with Steve fishing a while back, and I knew this was a large trout. And what came to my mind was, oh, would it be larger than what Becky caught? So I doubt, honestly, in a lifetime, I will ever have a fish as large. But to be able to bless that and to have joy together. The harder category that we save to the end is this category of welcome suffering. And I don't want people to hear two things. First is, like, if you have a headache, welcome it. No. If you have a headache, take aspirin. If you can relieve suffering in a way that bears goodness and honor, oh my gosh, that should be our first stance. Suffering is not what God desires for us. And that implies the second thing is, I despise when people say, well, God's trying to teach me something through this suffering, as if God gives you suffering as a pedagogical process so that you will learn. The fact is, God does not dispense our suffering. Again, we could have another podcast on that, but let me underscore, God uses our suffering to open up our heart to engage either our idolatry, where we are trusting in something other than him, or opens our heart to the desires that really are there for life itself. But in that whole framework of being able to say, do we even have a stance of hospitality with regard? Yes, discernment, assessment. You don't welcome in one sense, all suffering, but suffering that you cannot change, suffering that if it's going to be changed will be through a long, arduous process. Is there something in you that can welcome it and to say, you are here in some form to transform, to change my heart?
Well, just recently, I suffer from occipital neuralgia every so often in the last 5 years. And it was on a Saturday where I couldn't get into my chiropractor, who can work on the part of my neck that seems to release the firings. And I realized that I could talk to God. I could tell my family this is happening. And that's a big deal for me, because I always want to help the family. I never want to tell anyone I'm not feeling well, never. But I told them, and then I just took time to breathe and to breathe in and breathe out. And that's a hard thing to do when you're suffering, and it's patience. And I just trusted, like, I'll be able to get through this, but I'm going to do this. But it was hard to step away from the family and a Saturday of how I wanted. So I think I welcomed the suffering. I didn't push it away, because that would have made it worse. And I trusted, and I did certain movements and breathing that was, lessened it for a bit. And is that what you mean?
Oh, I'm thinking of, that's so much more. Some of the greatest struggle that I've had in life has watching you in the middle of the kind of firing literally like a electrical charge. At one point you said that there were like 60 a minute charges. And when I asked you what the pain level was, you said a 9 or a 10. And I'm known as a more exaggerative person. You're not. And so I knew that was a level of agony that brought for both of us a question of how will you live with that level of pain? So to even have, when you told me that you were beginning to have those firings, I felt trauma. I began to fragment, shut down, but I could also feel rage, like not now, not ever again, but not now. And just because, again, sometimes I don't know what our audience thinks in terms of our preparing podcasts, but this preparation, thinking about hospitality since Antonio and the experience with him in our driveway, it took me moments to say, I need to welcome my fear. Mm-hmm. I need to welcome my rage.
Yeah.
I need to welcome my tears that I have as I'm watching you suffer. But a lot of that came because I saw your own heart welcoming in a way that I had not seen, at least in this particular kind of experience. And I would do almost anything to remove that from your body to suffer, as I would friends who have had kidney disease and cancer. And it becomes a really hard category to say, can we welcome our own death? Can we welcome the death of those whom we love with our very heart and being? And that I don't have, as we come to an end, I don't have the maturity to say yes to that.
But I think it goes back to Psalm 33, that phrase, settle in our hearts that the Lord is our heavenly Father and will guide us only into that which will finally result in our joy and radiance. Mm. We need to settle our hospitality to so many things.
Mm. A good place to end. Thank you, my love, for joining me.
Oh, great to be with you.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.